This is Chapter 4, Part 1. We'll break Chapter 4 into 3 different parts. Overall, this chapter is about verbal messages that we share. It's important for us to start out with a definition of the word verbal. It's easy to remember it this way. Verbs are words. Verbal communication is language. Verbal communication may take place in a spoken form, or it may also take place, of course, in a written form. Any expression through language is considered verbal communication or a verbal message. This section is on the principles of verbal messages. So as they tend to do in this text, the author breaks down the different ways that messages are perceived. So here you have the first couple. Messages are packaged. They're packaged verbally and non-verbally. We've already defined what verbal is, linguistic means of communication. Non-verbal messages are communications sent or messages sent in other than linguistic means. So that may be body language. That may be silence. That may be a grunt. It could be any number of non-linguistic expressions. If you are in a face-to-face environment, messages will be sent on both levels simultaneously, verbal and non-verbal. The author also puts forth the assertion that meanings of messages are in people. Meanings are not received, they are created. Essentially, this is just meaning that there is no one definition to any term or any experience. Each individual is going to place value on expressions, on experiences, differently. The way we place value on things is going to be a part of our life experience. Is going to be shaped by our biases. So you may send a message intending to communicate one idea, and because of someone else's bias, they receive a message other than what you intended. Meanings are denotative and connotative. Denotative definitions are the objective or dictionary definitions, and connotative definitions are subjective, typically when an emotion is attached to the meaning of a word. For instance, you can take the word criticize. Most of us don't like the idea of being criticized. But it's not because there's anything wrong with criticism, it's because a lot of people do criticism poorly. And they make us feel bad whenever we're criticized. It's not what criticism is about, but it's a negative connotation attached to the word. So here they have snarl and purr words. It's kind of abstract. A snarl word is a word with a negative connotation, and a purr word is one with a positive connotation. Understanding regional connotations, cultural connotations, or even personal connotations can have an important impact on your interpersonal communication. The next one is that messages vary in abstraction. If you remember back to your English classes, you've probably heard of concrete and abstract terms. Concrete meaning something that is completely understandable, something that we have a relationship with, something we've seen it before, we can understand it. Abstract is something that's a bit more difficult to understand. It's up for interpretation. So messages vary in abstraction. You have high and low level abstractions. So the most effective messages, they say, will include words at many levels of abstraction. But that only depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you are trying to be very clear and precise, you are going to use low levels of abstraction. Instead of saying, I'll meet you later this afternoon downtown, you would say, I'll meet you at 3 o'clock at Mad Hatter's. For those of you who are not from Lubbock, Mad Hatter's is a local game store. Whenever I say I'll meet you at 3 o'clock at Mad Hatter's, that is a lot less abstract than saying I'll meet you downtown this afternoon. Messages also vary in levels of politeness. Of course, we are trained to be polite people, of course. But you have some interesting terms here that we don't usually use in conversation. That's positive face and negative face. If you're talking about face, you're talking about pride, reputation. You're talking about things along those lines, the self-concept. So positive face is the right to be thought of positively. Negative face is the right to remain autonomous. Direct messages are less polite typically. That's where you might tell someone to do something. Inclusive messages are more polite. And then there's a section on etiquette, or netiquette, rather, on page 93, and I recommend that you go and read that. Messages can be anonymous or anonymous. And we're fairly familiar with the idea of being anonymous, where we don't have our name attached to something. You want to get somebody a gift, but you don't want them to know where it comes from. What do? You wrap it all up and you set it somewhere neutral with their name on it, and you do not sign it. So anonymous means signed. Anonymous would mean unsigned in reality. Now the thing about anonymity is that it can encourage honesty. But it can also, because there are fewer opportunities for repercussion, it can make people extreme, outrageous, aggressive, downright mean. And so there are ups and downs to the ability to produce anonymous messages. There's an ethical perspective called publicity test. Before you send an anonymous message, consider, would I want my name attached to this? Would I say this if someone knew it was me that said it? If you aren't willing to have people know who sent that message, then maybe you shouldn't send it. Of course, there are exceptions, but most of the time, if we wouldn't be proud enough to put our name on it, we probably should not be sending the message. Messages can also be used to deceive, something that we're all familiar with. Lies, deception. These can have a huge impact on interpersonal relationships at all levels. Lying is the act of sending messages with the intent of giving another person information you believe to be false. It requires reception by another person, and it must be intentional. So the author of your text says that you can't lie accidentally. If you don't know any better and you share false information based on the fact that you just didn't know, that may make you ignorant, but it does not make you deceptive. Deception requires intent. So there are 4 types of lies put forth here in the text. Prosocial lies meant to benefit the target. This is where we might say to someone, if they ask if the outfit they have on looks good, and you say, "Oh yeah, you look great," even if they look terrible. But why would we say this? Maybe to boost their self-esteem or to help them save face. Then you have the self-enhancement deception, which is meant to boost your own self-image, the way you see yourself, as well as how other people see you. So you might brag about how good you are at a particular skill or a particular hobby, even if you may not be that great. Perhaps you grew up going fishing, that was your family thing, your family hobby, you always did it together. You just never were very lucky whenever it came to fishing, but you know all about it, and so you tell people you're a great sportsman when it comes to fishing. It may or may not be appropriate. Self-enhancement deception is lying for the sake of making other people look up to you. Then you have selfish deception, which is meant to protect yourself. Hence the word selfish. It's where that you know that you have done wrong. And if discovered, these lies might hurt others. They might hurt relationships. They're oftentimes used to protect a relationship. My parents usually said, whenever I was a child and I would get in trouble for being deceptive, they would say that a lie is the second transgression. This is a selfish deception. I broke the lamp, let's say. And instead of confessing that I broke the lamp because I was throwing a ball in the house, I said that someone actually came in here and all they did was knock the lamp over and then they ran out the door laughing. Well, I was doing so to protect myself. I lied to protect myself in that case. By the way, this didn't actually happen. That would be a selfish deception. And then the 4th type of deception is the antisocial deception, which in essence is a lie that's meant to harm others, whether that's spreading false rumors about someone or something else that's a bit more extreme, even falsely accusing outright in a court of law or in business to try to get someone fired, something along those lines. It's meant to cause harm on some level. And lastly, for this video, messages vary in levels of assertiveness. To be assertive means to be somewhat dominant, to be the first one to speak, to get your ideas out there, to make sure that no one talks over you. It's not quite aggressive, and it's not quite dominant, but it's being forward. Most people see assertiveness as a positive trait, especially in the working world. So ways that we can become more assertive is to look at other people who are assertive and what does that communication look like. So analyze assertive communications. If you're not very good at being assertive, you may have to practice. So whenever other people are assertive, how do they behave? What does their body language look like? What do their words sound like? So whenever you see that, you can practice what's called systematic desensitization, which just means getting your body used to doing those things. If you're uncomfortable, your body will feel uncomfortable. So the more often you do it, the more comfortable you will become. So you may have to practice, and that practice may be all by yourself. Practicing through scenarios in the workplace. This will largely depend on the situation that you are trying to learn assertiveness for. And then, as you can see, this 4-step process to communicate assertively. There's a lot more information on that in the text. I encourage you, as always, to read the chapter.